There's no reduction in capability that this camera has over the X-Pro1. This one is entirely as capable. To be honest, I think it's a rather better camera. Well, hello everybody, and today I'm going to show you one of the nicest mirrorless cameras that I've ever shot. It's not a new mirrorless camera by any means. It dates from 2012, so it's not the latest technology, but I do think this is a lovely, lovely little camera. It's the Fujifilm X-E1. Now, this camera was sold as a cut down, lower priced version of the X-Pro1, and as such it has the same sensor, it has the same film simulations, it's got the same processing engine, and it's got the same fantastic image quality that the X-Pro1 always had. It's slightly smaller than the X-Pro1, and personally I think it's a rather nicer camera. It will shoot any of the modern Fuji lenses, and there are some very, very nice ones available. It will also shoot just the same as any mirrorless camera, any vintage lens you care to mount on it, just about. There are one or two exceptions, but pretty much any vintage lens will mount on this camera and shoot. So there is our little X-E1, and you'll see as I turn it what a very small machine it is. It can fit easily into the palm of my hand, and I don't have particularly large hands, but it fits very easily into my hand. The controls are similar to the X-Pro1. We've got the four-way control dial here. On the top plate we've got some very similar action going on, in that we've got the very handy exposure compensation dial here, and we've also got the shutter speed dial here, which is a lovely feature of these Fuji cameras, and that has an A setting. When you turn it to the A setting, of course that is auto. So the viewfinder is on the left hand side of the camera. That's an EVF only. It doesn't have the optical viewfinder that the X-Pro1 did. It has a built-in flash, which the X-Pro1 didn't have, and you just push this little button here to bring up the little flash, and that's a nicely engineered little thing in the usual way that these flash units are. And you can also tilt this up a little if you want to bounce the flash, and that's quite a nice handy little feature to have, which I believe the X-Pro1 didn't have that. The screen at the back is fairly small. Let's turn on the camera. We can see that the screen there is not a large screen, and not only is it not a large screen, but it doesn't articulate. It's fixed in that position, and I must admit I don't find that particularly easy, and I've not found that rear screen a great deal of use. I've pretty much used the EVF for everything. The EVF on here is a very, very nice high resolution one. I think it's, do correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's around about 2 million pixels or dots or something of that sort. Look how easily it fits into my hand. That's just such an easy camera to use. You've got the shutter button right there, you've got the on-off button right there, you've got exposure comp right there, and with an automatic lens, with an electronic lens, this is such a simple camera to use, and it makes those fantastic images from the X-Pro1, same sensor as the X-Pro1, which is now becoming very much a cult camera, and I think this one will as well. This is such a nice little camera. It's such a charming and engaging and capable little camera that I do think this little camera will begin to rise in price, and I do think this will become a cult camera in the same way that the X-Pro1 has done, and indeed continues to do, shows no sign of stopping. So this is definitely one to watch. So I've been out shooting this camera. Let's go out now into the field and do a bit of shooting and see how we get on. So here we are out shooting, filming with the delightful and wondrous little X-E1, and the first thing I'd like to talk about in regard to this camera is the image quality, which is utterly stunning, and that's the right word for it. Images from this sensor are absolutely outstanding. There is nothing quite like them. It's the same sensor that was used in the X-Pro1, and I think that sensor is a lot of the reason, as well as the design of the camera of course, but I think it's a lot of the reason why the X-Pro1 became so very, very popular, because the sensor gives absolutely stunning images. They're said to have a filmic quality, and well, I'm not entirely sure what that means exactly, but one thing is for sure, the images from this sensor look like images from no other digital camera that I've ever used, and I've used quite a few. They are certainly very, very different to the Sony colours, which are pretty good in themselves. The Olympus colours are very nice, but the colours from this sensor outstrip those as well. They're just unlike the images from any other digital sensor that I've seen. They have far more resonance, they seem far more solid, they seem far more, what can I say, substantial, deep, resonant. I've already said that word, but now I've said it twice, so it must be true. They really are quite extraordinary. It bumps up colours like you've never seen. There are not too many film simulations bundled with this camera. I don't think the first generation X-Trans sensor was really capable of too many of those simulations, but we do have, what do we have? We have Provia, which is the standard, we have Velvia, which is very pumped up colours, and then we have ProNeg High and ProNeg Standard, and those really are all varying degrees of saturation. There are some black and white simulations as well, monochrome with red, green and yellow filters. Perhaps not the most successful part of the camera. I've seen other digital cameras do equally nicely in black and white results, but it's the colour results that really make this sensor out there on its own. It doesn't matter that it's not particularly high resolution, it doesn't matter that it's not in the latest camera. What matters are the images it makes, and they're just stunning. Now you may be aware that it's possible to cook up some colours on these Fuji X cameras, to cook up some film recipes rather. The potential for doing that on this one is fairly limited. It can't really make so many simulations as the later X-Trans sensors can. The X-Trans 2 can make loads, the X-Trans 3 can make even more, and so on. Nevertheless, it is possible to play around with white balance, which is the main factor that affects these looks, and things like sharpness and highlights and so on, and you can cook up some reasonably interesting looking simulations. There's a nice blue one I managed to make, there's a kind of a Kodachrome one that I managed to make, but really the bundled images are so nice that you don't really need to bother cooking any of your own. What's on board is entirely usable and acceptable. Now, whichever way you look at it, This is a really small camera. It's a small mirrorless camera. It's smaller, in fact, than the X-Pro1 on which it's based and on which it shares most of its internal working parts, and I think that's a great thing. This camera has a very, very small form factor, and using it reminds me very much of using something like an old Olympus Trip 35, or maybe my favourite point and shoot, my favourite film point and shoot, the Nikon L35AF. There really is nothing to think about. There's nothing to get in the way, nothing to think about. It's really, really simple to use, and it's very small. So it feels like one of those older style cameras, or a cheap 60s rangefinder. I think it captures the spirit of the old rangefinder camera rather better than the X-Pro1 did. I think, to be honest, I think the X-Pro1 got in its own way just a little bit. This reminds me of the best of the 60s, 70s point and shoots, simple rangefinders, in a way that the X-Pro1 just didn't. Now, this little camera was sold as a cut-down version of the X-Pro1, but personally, I think it's rather better. And I think one of the main reasons for that is the viewfinder. The X-E1 on test today has a beautiful, very high resolution electronic viewfinder with all the shooting information in there as one would expect to find in any electronic digital camera. However, the X-Pro1 also had a little lever that you could push, and it moved the EVF out of the way and brought in a purely optical finder. So you could use that camera just as though you were using an old rangefinder or an old point and shoot, just looking through the glass. But I don't know, I found that a very limited use. You can't see any focusing information in it, for example, if you're using vintage lenses. You can't see any exposure information in it. So it's really only much use if you're using electronic lenses, which is fine, but apart from that, it's really not a great deal of use, and I didn't find myself using it that very much at all. It was a novel experience for sure, but I just didn't use it very much, and I'm wondering if perhaps it's a little bit gimmicky. I think perhaps it might be, and I think that's one of the ways that the X-Pro1 does get in its own way. This is a simplified version, and I think it's the better for it. Another massive improvement that this camera has over the X-Pro1, and it is a massive improvement, is that this camera has a diopter correction control. So it's just here right by the eyepiece. I don't know if you can see it there. I'll get a clearer shot of it for you, but it's just there right by the eyepiece. And that's a necessary thing. People have different kinds of eyesight. My eyesight is pretty good, but you know, it's not quite as good as it was when I was 18. And I need a diopter control in any camera that I'm going to use. The X-Pro1 just didn't have one. And that's an astonishing omission, and I really can't think why. Was it to perhaps ape the practice of older times, out of older photographic practice? I'm not sure about that. The only cameras I can think of that had those extra diopter pieces that you had to buy were some of the earlier Nikon SLRs. I mean, even the old Russian rangefinders, the Zorky 4 and even the Fed 4 and the Fed 3, I think even the Fed 2 had a diopter adjustment, so it's a necessary thing, and it wasn't included on the X-Pro1, so this is an improvement. There's no ISO dial on the camera, but then there's none on the X-Pro1 either, and it's actually very easy to bring up the ISO setting. There's a button on the corner here, this function button, if you can see that. Just push that and that brings up the ISO setting, so that's actually very easy to set. There's no reduction in capability that this camera has over the X-Pro1. This one is entirely as capable as the X-Pro1, and it's a lot less fussy as well, I find, and to be honest, I think it's a rather better camera. So what's this little camera like to use? Well, would the word liberating be a silly word to use? I find this camera liberating. I find it frees me up. I don't have to think about anything too much. It's nice and simple. There's no complexity involved. It feels, as I say, like some of my favourite point and shoots. A real simple machine that you don't have to think about and you don't have to consider. You just shoot with it and you know for a fact your shots are going to be stunning. It's designed in the rangefinder style, that is to say it doesn't have a faux mirror hump like an SLR. It has its viewfinder on the side, just like a rangefinder does on the left hand side of the camera. But it doesn't feel like a rangefinder to use. It actually feels far more simple. With a rangefinder you've got to do a lot of mucking about with focusing and getting those split images absolutely together. As long as you're using an automatic electronic lens on here and not a vintage one, it's actually far easier to use than any rangefinder I've ever used. I think this camera really is a case of less is more. However, as with many things in life, there is a caveat, because the focus peaking on this camera is the worst focus peaking system I've ever seen on any camera, and that really is saying something, because I've shot quite a few of these mirrorless cameras. First of all, it's only in one colour. All you have is white, and of course that doesn't work if you've got a white background or you're trying to focus a white object, or indeed anything light coloured on a bright day. So it's very difficult to use. This is the point where I usually say it's not that great, but it's entirely usable. But I'm not going to say it on this occasion because I don't think it is entirely usable. Sometimes it's just about useful, sometimes it helps, other times it doesn't, other times it might as well just not be there and you'll end up focusing by eye. And all right, that's possible, but it's just such a shame that the peaking system isn't a little better, and it doesn't seem to make too much difference which vintage lens you use it with. I tried it with a Jupiter 8, a famously lowish contrast lens. Didn't give great results on that. I tried it with the Carl Zeiss Jena, which is a much more contrasty lens, but again it really didn't give good results on that. So unless you're really patient, this is a camera best used, I think, with an electronic lens. It doesn't have to be a fancy lens. I've got a very simple lens on this one. It's the Fuji X-C, I think it's 15 to 45. Yeah, 15 to 45, 3.5 to 5.6. So it's really not a fancy lens. It's a very basic kit lens, but this camera gives the best results with an electronic lens. Focus peaking is really a pain in the neck. Now, I've had a lot of fun shooting this little camera. This is one of the most enjoyable cameras I've shot in a long time. It's simple, it's small, it's good looking, it gets out of its own way, and it makes stunning images, the like of which are very rare from a digital camera. There are few digital cameras that make images this nice. So there we are. I've had a great time shooting this little camera. It's not the most advanced mirrorless camera in the world. It's not the newest mirrorless camera in the world. It's certainly not the most advanced Fujifilm camera in the world, but it is one of the most likable, and this image sensor really is quite something. Okay, you can't do so many film sims on it, although you can play around a little bit. The X-T1, 2, 3 and 4 are far better in that regard. But there's just something about the images that come out of this sensor. They're just remarkable. They have an X quality that I don't think any other images have, even from any of the other Fuji cameras. This is quite a unique sensor. A very nice little machine, and very cheap at the moment at around £200. If you want to dip a toe into the world of mirrorless photography, and especially into the world of Fujifilm mirrorless photography, I would say this is the camera to go for. It's got everything you need, it's got nothing you don't need, and it's a great representative of the type and the Fujifilm approach. So my advice is grab one while you can. So coming up soon, we've got, well, I'll tell you what, we've got a choice of things that we could have a look at. We've got some nice cheap 50mm lenses and other focal lengths over here, nice very cheap ones that you can buy for a song and use on your mirrorless cameras. We've got Soligor, we've got Olympus, we've got, what's this one? I think this is a Ricoh. Yeah, that's, oh no, that's a Domiplan Meyer Optic. We've got Ricohs, we've got all sorts of cheap lenses that I could show you if that's what you want me to do. Or I've got this wondrous thing here. This is a Carl Zeiss Jena 20mm f4 that needs a little bit of work. I'll just show you quickly, actually, it's worth having a look. So it's got a little bit of fungus behind the front element. You might be able to see there in the light. I think that will be easy enough to clean. Just take this ring out and clean that element. Hopefully it's gone no further than the front element. It does have a fault, and these CZJs are quite well known for faults in the aperture mechanism. This has a fault in the aperture mechanism, and if you look through it, you'll see that it's, you might be able to see that right now it's fully open, and it won't change from fully open. It's an exact amount, so there's a bit of stickiness in this mechanism somewhere. It's supposed to close down when you push that button, but it's not doing that at the moment. So if you would like an episode where I service this lens, get it running, get it working, and then go out and shoot it and see what it can do, maybe compare it to some other wide angles as well, I'll make that episode. So let me know what you'd like to see. The cheapies that you can go out and shoot for a song, or this wondrous old Carl Zeiss Jena that we need to fix up and shoot. Let me know in the comments box below. So that's it from me for now. Please don't forget to like, subscribe and ring that bell before you go. The more subscribers we get, the more successful the channel becomes, and we do need to grow. And the more we grow, the easier it is for me to keep bringing you these productions. If you'd like to support the channel and help it to grow and develop, you can do that at patreon.com/Zenography. That too will help the channel to grow. You can do that from as little as $1 per month, and we do need to grow. So, as always, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time for some more Zenography.